Hi, everybody. My name is Johnny Flood. As Ryan said, I'm the Literacy Programs Manager here at Vermont Humanities. And I'll sort of be asking some questions and moderating tonight. And my first job is to get to introduce the founder of Get Thee to the Funnery Shakespeare Camps, a longtime friend of mine, an author and a professor and a performing artist and a clown and a man who wears many, many, many hats and has given a lot to the state. He was awarded Vermont's Arts Educator of the Year by the governor in 2016, well deserved. And he's going to start off by telling us a little bit about this, Dr. Peter Gould.
Hi, Johnny. Thank you. And also thanks to Ryan for the intro. I want to say first off that I appreciate the land acknowledgement that Ryan just gave, and I want to add an acknowledgement of my own, with all due respect to the power and integrity of Indigenous land acknowledgements, which have been getting more frequent. It's just a wonderful part of presentations. It turns out that I've been doing an acknowledgement a long time whenever I introduce the Shakespeare camp each year, and I feel the urge to do that, as I always do at the beginning. Shakespeare's words have been around for centuries, for 400 years, and each new generation of readers and audiences and actors and directors, they take the characters and the words they say into our hearts, and we make them new every year. But it's important that we don't pretend that the words are new. The words we're speaking at the camp are historic. And they were here long before we were, and they'll be alive long before we're gone, long after we're gone, just like the teens, 20-somethings that we're about to introduce you to. Every year, new troops come, and they speak the words of Shakespeare, but some of them in the past, they didn't have climate change to face or to contend with, to confront. And did they realize the import of the images in the speech that we're featuring tonight? Or did they ask, how did Shakespeare know? Where did these images come from into his mind of a planet drowning in floods and crops rotting away, people dying for lack of breath? I was thinking about this. It was like the words of the fairy queen in A Midsummer Night's Dream are like a sleeper cell embedded in this play, just waiting for our period of history to wake up and speak unignorable truth. And that the way that we teach them at the Funnery, if you don't really get them right away, they can be a sleeper cell for you too. And all of a sudden, sometime when you're grown up, you realize that you have that knowledge and you got it from Shakespeare. And it's your opportunity to bust out your Shakespeare just when you need to. And this is the year that Vermont Humanities and the Get Thee to the Funnery have made this leap, hand in hand, arm in arm, to connect the issues of climate change, climate justice, climate activism, climate trauma with Shakespeare's great play, A Midsummer Night's Dream. And we used it to talk about what we have to do to confront what's happening in this state, in this country, in the world. And I want to acknowledge that, because in order to become a really incredibly relevant organization, Vermont Humanities had to pivot at a historic time just a couple of years ago. And we had to pivot too at the Funnery, because we were just overloaded with existential crises. You could choose one any day: the pandemic, the isolation, the need to deal with systemic racism, the political polarization that makes it hard to talk about anything. And it was all against the backdrop of climate change. And I just want you to know that the young people who come to our camp, they get this, they understand it. And they come to the Shakespeare camp and anyway, because they've heard it's fun. And then we hit them with the need to talk about stuff. When they come, they bring all their knowledge and their anxieties, their fears, their anger, their frustration with us, and their unmatchable energy to do good. You're going to meet them really soon. So we had to pivot. Vermont Humanities had to pivot because we're living in this mazed world. We've changed our wanted liveries because we had to. This is not a brag. All of us, except for maybe a few people like Bill McKibben, whom we met a couple nights ago, and Al Gore and James Hansen, they knew about all this stuff, and the rest of us have been moving very slowly. And you shouldn't feel bad if you're moving slowly to understanding about climate change, about the depths of the crisis. The arts have moved slowly. The humanities have moved slowly, not as slow as the federal government, but still too slow. I mean, and I admit it, I've directed Midsummer Night's Dream 7 times. And the first few times, the climate change theme hardly even registered with me. It was secondary to this plot and that other plot over there. But now, when I come to the play, the speech by Titania, the Fairy Queen, is the central place I go to every time, with reverence, with clarity, and with such an incredible desire to illuminate the text for the people who are at the camp this time around. This speech is ground zero to a most enormous issue. And it's just exactly like there's so many other speeches in Shakespeare, not many, but a lot of them, which are ground zero for important issues. I mean, you get issues about suicide. So you have Hamlet explaining how hard it is to do that because you don't know what's on the other side. And you get Caliban in The Tempest talking about how it feels like to be colonized, incarcerated, scorned and belittled, held in contempt. You get Macbeth with his ambition. There's a few speeches in Shakespeare which are like sleeper cells waiting for young people to join up at the camps, at the troops, and to really get galvanized to speak about these issues in a way that maybe they wouldn't have had the capacity before because they didn't quite have the words of Shakespeare and also the very specific techniques of Get Thee to the Funny, which I have to make clear to everybody. We teach a quadrant: the heart, the mind, the body, and the voice. We're really working in the past couple of years to make sure that everybody improves in their heart, in their body, in their mind, in their voice, particularly these past couple of years in the voice and in the heart. Why? So they can pick up the microphone. Okay, we really want them to pick up the microphone. I know what I told them this summer at the 2 camps this summer, one in Vermont and one in India. We want you to look out the window. And if you see a demonstration on the street, and if you're allowed to go out on the street, now you have the technique. You've got the heart, the body, the voice, the mind to do it. We want you to go out and join if it's an issue that really gets your passions up. Get out there and don't just march. Grab the microphone because you have so much important stuff to say. Getting to what we're going to talk about tonight, climate change as evidenced in A Midsummer Night's Dream. This is what, in Act 2, Scene 1, what the Fairy Queen Titania says to Oberon, the Fairy King, who really doesn't want to listen to anything she's saying. And, it's nothing gets me more excited about this play than to see what the actor who we've chosen to play the Fairy Queen does with the speech. Why don't we see that right now? Here.
These are the forgeries of jealousy, and never since the middle summer spring met we on hill, in dale, in forest or mead, by paved fountain or by rushy brook, or in the beached margent of the sea, to dance our ringlets to the whistling wind. But with thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport. Therefore the winds, piping to us in vain, as in revenge, up from the sea contagious fogs, which, falling in the land, hath every belting river made so proud that they have overborne their continents. The ox had therefore stretched his yoke in vain, the ploughman lost his sweat, and the green corn hath rotted ere his youth attained a beard. The fold stands empty in the drowned field. The 9 men's morris is filled up with mud, and the quaint mazes in the wanton green for lack of tread are indistinguishable. The human mortals want their winter here. No night is now with hymn or carol blessed. Therefore the moon, the governess of floods, pale in her anger washes all the air, that rheumatic diseases do abound. And through this distemperature we see the seasons alter. Hoary-headed frosts fall in the fresh lap of the crimson rose. The spring, the summer, the childing autumn, angry winter change their wonted liveries, and the mazed world, by their increase, now knows not which is which. And this same progeny of evils comes from our debate, from our dissension. We are their parents and original.
Shakespeare, I mean, really? Rheumatic diseases, asthma, or COVID-19? How did he know? I feel like some speeches in Shakespeare just tower over others. It's an exciting moment for the people who teach at the Funnery to witness somebody getting it and learning the speech. And we assured people, no, the Fairy Queen's going to be okay. She's immortal. She's been having arguments with Oberon forever. And she's seen tectonic plates move across the planet. She's seen ice ages come and go, so she's going to be okay. But she's allowing herself to feel empathy for the humans. That's us, the humans, and what we're having to face. Anyway, my last thought to you is, about this is don't feel bad because you're coming to the issue slowly. The best thing that you can do is to listen to these words of wisdom and to hear. Well, I think the first thing we're going to hear is because we've been really emphasizing the heart thing this year. I'm really interested to hear how Kokila was able to bump it up when she really began to feel the words in the text. So I'll send it back to Johnny. I just want to say that feelings are really important. They're as important as anything else in our camp. We're responsible for how the campers feel. We know that when we have the discussions, people are going to feel them. And as Bill McKibben said a couple nights ago, it's a lot of bad stuff going on, a lot of science that is so crushing in its enormity. And we should listen to that, but also we should get in touch with how we feel about it, because that's going to make us stronger. Said enough. Here's one of my closest friends who keeps me sane and connected and inspired from his desk at Vermont Humanities and in the middle of his 18th consecutive year at Get Thee to the Funnery. Here's Johnny Flood.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah. Well said to all of it. And again, thank you, Kokila, for that performance. So before we dive into some questions, there's a lot I want to hear from you all. Hopefully we can just go around and do some quick introductions so folks watching at home know who they're listening to. Maybe just tell us who you are, where you are, and anything else you think we ought to hear about or about you. The first on my screen is Ollie.
Hi, I'm Ollie. I am a Get Thee to the Funnery veteran. I just completed my 10th year as a camper, and I'm very excited to continue doing stuff with them because it's been a part of my life for just so long. Yeah.
Where are you right now, Ollie?
I'm currently at college in Amherst, Massachusetts. It's very weird being out of Vermont. I really like it there.
Great, thank you. And next I have Alex.
Hi. Oh gosh, I'm in Montpelier. What else was I supposed to say?
Just tell us your name and where you are and your connection to the camp, maybe.
I've been going to the camp for 3 years, but my brother went before, so yeah.
Thank you.
And you're a high school student.
And Andrea.
Hi, I'm Andrea Dev. My pronouns are she/her. I'm from Kolkata in India, and I'm still in the 12th grade, and I'm really new to the Funnery. I mean, I just attended camp this year, so I'm just excited to spend more years attending more camps.
And what time is it for you, Andrea, right now?
Currently, it's 4:48 a.m.
in the morning.
Thank you. Thank you for making the time, and good morning. Winnie.
Hi, I'm Winnie. I just completed my first year at Get Thee to the Funnery camp, and I'm joining from Virginia. My pronouns are she and her. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks, Winnie. And Kokila.
Hi, Hi, I'm Kokila. I'm currently in Bombay, India, where it is also 4:48 in the morning. And I work as an actor full time. And I'm also very new to the funnery. I was very fortunately introduced to Peter and everyone at the funnery. I want to say a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. And we had this lovely experience where just everyone across the world was talking to each other and getting to know each other. And somehow in 6 days, we just built this amazing relationship. And I'm so fortunate to have had this opportunity that came out of nowhere. So, yeah.
Well, Kokila, maybe we can start with you because we just heard that fabulous speech. Hopefully you can just tell us a little bit about learning that speech and being introduced to that speech and what that process was like for you and how the relationship to the land and to the climate crisis came into it.
So that was actually a very interesting experience for me because I think I joined this workshop because I thought it was just a Shakespeare camp where I was going to learn a little bit about, I was going to be reintroduced to Shakespeare, which is something that, you know, I had worked on Shakespeare plays many years ago when I was in school, in high school. And I think I just looked at this as, oh yeah, I'm going to have a 6-day camp where I'll just be talking to some people sitting in Vermont and we're going to talk about Shakespeare, and that was it. But then and also when I approached this monologue the first 3 times that I read it honestly I didn't think. I was just sort of focused on, we were thinking about vectors and just how to approach a monologue. There was no concept of what I was really trying to say. And then I think one day I had a conversation with Peter where he was like, you know what, this is what we're talking about. And suddenly it just became so personal because it was like, right, this is about generations in the past have not had to worry about climate change the way that we have, because they haven't seen the actual effects of our own actions so clearly in front of our eyes. And today I look around and just everything around me shows me that climate change has affected, I mean, the seasons truly in front of me. In the last 3 years, I've seen the length of the monsoon in the city I live in, which is famous for its long, very, very floody monsoons, which is just a normal thing. Suddenly, it's like we have 5 days of rain and then we just don't. And you can just imagine how that affects crops and farmers and just everyone around. And you know, these are just things that we look at, and maybe people in the city, our lives are more convenient when we don't have that much rain because we can get around easier. We don't have to deal with all of those things, but it's that it affects the crop and the farmers around us. And so just reading this monologue and actually just thinking about it suddenly just made me so angry, and I really felt it. And everything just sort of made sense at that point. And I really could say, and it's interesting to find that Shakespeare, who wrote this God knows how many years ago, has the words to describe exactly what we're going through right now. And I was telling Peter when I first started this that I suffer from very serious stage fright, and I shake when I have to speak in front of people. But I don't think I had to be concerned because this was just something that I felt, you know. Mm.
That's really well said. Yeah, if I can turn to Winnie, you had, as you said, you just completed your first year at the camp this summer, and you and I got to work a little bit together. So that's great. But you were in the, I don't think you performed the speech, but you were in the scene with the performer, and we spent a lot of time on it. Coming out of this experience, sort of first introduction to Shakespeare, first introduction to this show, what has struck you about that speech in particular? What has carried over?
Well, what jumped out at me the most from hearing it rehearsed so many times was the fact that Titania was willing to, oh my gosh, I'm blanking, willing to say that she was wrong and admit that she was at fault, as well as many others. But she had went up to Oberon and said, this isn't fair, we have to fix this. But she didn't say, you have to fix this. She said, we have to fix this because it's our fault. and we are entirely responsible for this. And I think that humans, I mean, all people need to accept that it is our fault and we need to fix it.
Hmm.
Well said.
Yeah, yeah, I think again, it's amazing to think about these words and how long they've carried through and how many generations they've touched, and that we can still get to a place where we say, yeah, we're learning that specific lesson. Okay, so yes, we're connected to it. We're angry. We're taking responsibility. Maybe Alex, I can turn to you and ask you a little. Where are you at these days with all of this, with the climate crisis? And if we're taking responsibility, like, you know, I know you are at least very politically thoughtful and engaged, and you're always reading texts that I want to read. So I'm curious to get your perspective on sort of those points, that we're taking responsibility and we're engaging with our anger, justified anger. What does the present and the future look like for you?
I think it's really important to acknowledge the people who from the beginning have been talking about this, and people who have from the beginning been working towards a better future. And I think in the future of, oh shoot, I'm blinking too. I think educating people is really important, and having those tough conversations with people and just being able to communicate like thoughtfully with people, which actually in the funnery, not this year, but 2020 funnery, we got to have a conversation about those open conversations and talking with people about those hard topics. And just really being open and understanding and working as a community to build a system to work to fight like the negative impact of climate change, and to help like everybody be able to do it, and not to like go against people, and just to work to be open-minded with it.
Yeah, well, I think that's also well said. And it does make me think of, some of us have had snippets of this sort of conversation before. Just the nature of working with, funnily enough, with theater. And that theater is this very collaborative act, and can feel sort of high stakes at times in its own way. Ollie, you, as you said, you're a 10-year veteran of the camp. You maybe, what is your experience with the camp, and maybe just this past year or the year before, or both, and what that process has looked like, and how maybe it has help us think about these sorts of issues more deeply?
Yeah, so over the past, like this year and the year before, have been very different in terms of how they were structured, I guess, because they were the first years where we really had serious conversations that were like relevant to the play, but also were just current issues going on. And I thought that it was very useful to have that space to learn and to talk about things, because sometimes it can be very difficult to like talk to people in a way that's productive, especially when it comes to online spaces, which I can talk more about if need be. So I found like having a place to like bring ideas to the camp was very useful.
Well, maybe I would like to have you follow up on what you mean by, because so much of our, work, literal jobs, and our schooling, but also our organizing work is online these days. So maybe I'd love to hear what you mean about elaborating on that. Specifically,
when it comes to social media, it can be very difficult to have productive conversations, because people, there's certain people who just want to get a rise out of you, just want to make you angry. And so they're not going to actually want to listen, and they're just going to say inflammatory things that you respond. And that can be very dangerous for people who are seeing that conversation and seeing them like be the one that's level-headed and civil, because there's this really weird ideal to like have civil conversations, and then people will like you show that off and be like, but I was being civil, therefore I like won this debate. And that can really help people who are just interested in learning about climate change learn and believe some really horrendous things. So yay.
It's a valuable point, I think.
Let me just put in something. It is true that we've really begun to tackle important issues at the camp, and it feels a little bit strange sometimes. Last year, we just stopped doing the Merchant of Venice, and we brought in a facilitator from outside and said, we're gonna speak now about hate speech and racism and you know, and how that affects our lives. And this year, right in the middle of our rehearsals, I felt bad about it, but bringing everybody up out of the white tent and putting them up on the hillside, I said, we're going to talk now about climate change. And I was ambivalent about it, but as soon as people started to open their mouths and talk and share how much they knew and how strongly they felt, I felt this is why we're here.
That's something else, is that it really helps bring the passion from people, where it's like, if someone might not be too terribly interested in the topic that we're discussing, the people who are very interested in it can help like bring passion and energy to other people. So I'm very politically active and aware. And so this is something that like I can help like talk to people and get them to like understand why I am so politically active, which is something that like I think that at Funnery we were able to like create that passion, because after like the official discussion ended, we like went away and like broke into separate groups and still talked about it.
Yeah, and maybe we can circle back to this a little bit later, but what you're saying about social media, obviously this is a big topic. It's become broader than a social topic. It's a political topic over the past few years. And there's more to say on that, but it's also like connected us. You know, there's a reason we get to speak with Andrea and Kokila and get to work with them. And so let's even go to that. So Andrea, I kind of just want to zoom out on this and like, what are you thinking about, and what is your experience in the climate crisis right now? What's on your mind around it?
Well, mostly what's on my mind, or was on my mind a few days ago, was Pujos. It's a period of celebration of, you know, gods, and it's kind of distressing because that's the period where we all go out and meet our families, and absolutely everyone's on the road. And I remember my dad was driving us to one of the functions we had to attend because family. And there was just so many cars out on the road. It was pretty much like the whole city out on the road. And that just made me realize that there's so much emissions. And honestly, Pujo is already like the worst time to go out, but you could like really like feel the pollution in the air. And so that just worries me, that what's it going to be like when I'm old, if it's this bad already. If I ever have kids, then what will they go through in the future? And honestly, that scares me the most.
I've had this experience recently, Andrea, around COVID, of standing in a crowded space or being close to folks that I don't know, and having this new awareness of that there's a threat here. There's something so ordinary that we know enough now to see as a threat. And that is really striking me, to see just traffic, you know, what for many people and for generations was kind of just this thing and this annoyance. And now you can look at it and think, that makes me worried about having children.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe we can stay in your country for a little bit, and Kokila, hear a little more from you about, I've heard you speak a little about your experience around the climate in India. Again, what's on your mind? What's striking you these days?
I have so many thoughts. I honestly don't know where to start. I have so much to say about everything, but I'm just going to try and keep it a little concise. But to add to what Andrea was saying about just the pollution being palpable and like actually being able to like notice the difference. I had an experience where I went back to where I grew up, which was Delhi, New Delhi, which is the capital of our country. And I was walking, and it was around this time of the year, which is Diwali, which is one of the biggest Hindu festivals in our country. And it's very common to like in the recent years, maybe when I say recent, could be around the last 20 years, and maybe more even, where firecrackers are a very common practice, and to the extent that every household has a ton of firecrackers that they are standing outside their houses and burning together. And it also coincides with the season where farmers burn the stubble of their crops because because it's an easy fix so that the soil is ready for the next, planting season or whatever. What is actually happening in our country right now is that we're also going through a very, very bad political time. So to tie into what Ollie said about social media, it's actually, that is actually my only trusted source of the news in my country, because I can't trust what my news channels are telling me today, because it is truly, without a doubt, everything that is being said on news channels is fed to them by the people in power right now. And the only people that I can trust are people that are willing to stand up and say that we are willing to deal with whatever. And they're under fire constantly, but they're people that will put up things on their social media. So we have reporters that have left mainstream journalism so that they can inform us of what's really going on in the world. So we have people like Faye D'Souza and Andre Borges and stuff, who are all reporters who used to have very, very strong careers on television news, but decided to leave it because they have a conscience. And they are the sources that we trust when it comes to our news. And so what's happening is that we have a very self-serving, I'm being horribly political, but we have a very self-serving government right now that cares only for, like, every time there's something awful happening, climate related, politically, there is something over dramatic that happens in the news simultaneously to distract attention. So right now we have one of the most famous actors in our country, Shah Rukh Khan. His son has been arrested in a drug case. And that's just there to sort of distract us from the fact that there are farmer protests happening, because farmers have been there's this thing going on where they have to basically meet a basic, where they don't get a basic price for the crop that they put forward, because we're all being taken over by much larger companies that have the ability to sort of provide vegetables at a lower cost because they're doing it in mass, whereas people like the littler farmers don't have that, which is why they end up burning crop, because for them it's a cheaper alternative and the government isn't helping them out. So it's just this whole mess of a very self-serving government that is not helping littler people out, which is why coming back to climate change, where people like farmers, who are a much poorer section of our society, don't really look at climate change as a pressing problem, because for them in their lives, they have, like, where does my next meal come from is a much more important question for them, or like where do I go to sleep, and farmer suicides are just the most common thing in our country right now. And so basically the point that I'm trying to make is that coming back to the palpable pollution, because of the crop burning, when I was in Delhi, I literally could not see the person in front of me because there was just so much fog, which was really just smoke. It wasn't fog. And so the fact that you can actually see that, and I mean, it's ridiculous that we've reached this point, but it's just because of like, corruption, that there aren't better solutions being provided to farmers, because there are really things that you can do. It's just slightly expensive for a farmer, so he wouldn't choose that. So I really think it's the responsibility of a government to step in and provide subsidies for the alternative farming practices. And so I'm currently seeing, and we're right back at Diwali season right now. November 4th is Diwali, and I'm sure that we're going to see all of that happen once again.
Great.
We have a lot of that sounds pretty familiar in our country, Kokila. We have plenty of parallels, right? Trusted news sources, and we have, in Vermont, we get smoke from wildfires on the West Coast, 3,000 miles away. And I think even though I often have the same experience that you're having, where you start to talk about climate change, and you have to talk about poverty, and you have to talk about agriculture and the global South, and governments and corporate. I mean, it is about everything in those ways. And I think that's really important. And I appreciate you bringing all of that into it, because while it can feel overwhelming, that you start talking about it, you pull the thread and there's a ton there. It's also, we can look at the ongoing strikes that are happening in our country this month and say, that's helping too, right? That's working against the same forces that we're talking about. And so thank you for that. Maybe we can stay with a bit of an international perspective, because Winnie, you have a very interesting perspective. You are someone who, in your earlier childhood, you've lived in different countries around the world. And I'm curious if you could just tell us a little bit about your experience in those other countries, and what it was, how the experience of dealing with climate change looked to you.
Well, what was really interesting to me with seeing many different cultures was the fact that each culture dealt with it differently. So I have to skip the first place I lived because I have no memory of it. But in Poland, there was so much pollution that my school had to be built like outside of the city and of the downtown area, because there was so much pollution. And so we drove out of the city every time we had to go to school. And then in Nicaragua, it really wasn't the top priority. There's so much poverty in Nicaragua, and there was really, it wasn't the priority. Climate change, I had no idea it even existed while living there, because there was no mention of it. But then once I moved to Argentina, there was more mention of it, and people there were small protests and close to the central locations in Argentina. And I remember going to one, and I was in my uniform, I showed up, and there was around 5 other kids that came with me, and there were 5 other kids who were there before we got there. And we showed up and we held these signs, and people actually came and stood there for an hour and just watched us, which was really weird. But it really depended on what priorities each culture had because of poverty and government and all that. And yeah.
I've heard you talk a little bit about that sort of funny protest in Argentina. Do you want to tell a little more of that story and your experience with it?
Okay, so starting off in school, I left class early with a few of my friends, and we were in 5th grade at the time, and the youngest person that came with us was not even in 1st grade yet. And we just drove over to the capital, we drove over to Buenos Aires, and in front of the Casa Rosada, which is basically the White House version of Argentina, and I don't think the president actually lives in there, but it doesn't really matter. But we went out there, and in front of the gate, we had our signs that had little think there was one that was about a bee. There was one that had a whole lot on it, and our parents had made it for us. And then we just walked out there in front of the fence, started chanting these things in English. So people didn't really understand what we were saying. But I mean, they got the message. And these other girls who were Argentine showed up and were like, hey, we're doing the same thing. Do you want to group together? And we didn't really understand each other very much, but we stood there and we went back and forth with Spanish and English. And and people started coming up and watching us. And it was pretty awkward because we didn't really understand what was happening. But so there was a lot going on. And then when we left, I remember walking away and feeling a lot stronger about the topic and thinking, like, my actual thought, I remember very clearly, was one day I'm going to die because I'm not going to be able to breathe because of air pollution. And that was my thought walking away from that experience. And it was a really dark thing to think about. But I thought that this whole thing was somebody else's fault and I shouldn't have to deal with it. And yeah.
Wow. Alex, I'd like to get back to what you were saying about, the way that, I think it was you, the way that the Fairy Queen was able to get Oberon to at least talk with her because of having strong feelings. I mean, have you had the experience of being able to engage people, started a discussion because of maybe accepting lower status yourself? And even though you've read and you know so much about the issues, have you had any success with getting people who are clearly opposed to your point of view to stand there and engage with you in a meaningful conversation?
Well, I think what Ollie was saying about social media and how so many of the people who you do have arguments with about this and discussions are just purely antagonistic based is a really important thing. And I think honestly, it's much harder to get people to understand and your opinions and beliefs about climate change, but it's more important to focus on creating a space where they can question theirs and be here's a different point of view, and just being able to really sit in that and understand how uncomfortable it can be to be incorrect and not not make them feel uncomfortable for being incorrect, which can be really hard. And really just creating that space and giving them the resources to learn more and to create their book.
As you can see, we're having a hard time making a real progress on this issue right now. And we're supposed to be going to the conference in Scotland, having made some progress. And the adults in the room just cannot seem to talk to each other. And it sort of makes me feel bad to just think that we're depending upon much younger people like you who might somehow, some way have the facility to make a safe space for people who don't agree with you to talk. If you have that skill, it's a great skill to have.
I want to take a minute and just say to folks listening that there's a chat and a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if there are any questions that you have for individual participants or for the panel generally, you can put those in at any time, and we'll be happy to kind of bring them up. Yeah, Peter, as you were saying that, well, it made me think, and I want to paraphrase Marx, who says, around your economic situation, that one of his theories was that your economic situation and where you reside informs your political beliefs. And that was him describing a theory of class. But as you're saying this, Peter, it makes me think that it works for age as well. That there are folks who have to contend with this crisis in a realer and more ongoing way than others. And it's important to find how we can be in solidarity with our younger leaders on this. And I really liked, Winnie, what you said about being in another country and not even being totally sure what the other folks are saying, but sort of willing to lend your voice and your support in international solidarity around the earth and the crisis. So that's all very interesting to hear, and it's giving me a lot to think about. I see folks nodding. Are there folks who want to add to that part of the conversation, or can I keep it? Is that a nod from Ollie? No. Okay. Well, you know, we've gone through a little bit of Shakespeare and a little bit of zooming out. And I'm wondering if any of you all have specific thoughts on exactly that, on the ways in which texts or theater or art more generally can really have an impact on this issue or issues like it. And I'm happy to have any of you answer that question or talk on that. Yeah, I see a hand from Ollie, and we haven't heard from Andrea. Andrea, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, the thing with art is that it influences like so much. Like art inspires whole movements, like civil rights ones, and like even like with climate change with Shakespeare, I actually researched his background with this, and apparently near where he lived, near Stratford-upon-Avon, the forest of Ardennes, it got really heavily deforested, and that's why Queen Elizabeth was like, go look for sea coal. And in his lifetime, he kind of experienced that shift to fossil fuels, which you see reflected in his work. And honestly, I think that not much of the world knew it at that time, but he was influencing a lot of people through his words to think about the climate. It's kind of like he was giving them like a warning that they didn't heed yet. And honestly, I think that we need more media that talks about climate change, you know, like in a way that people will like listen to and gravitate towards, because just telling them climate change is bad, I feel is just going to, you know, like it like doesn't work like that. And also like some people who just don't, you know, the denial, like those who are in denial, it will just reinforce their beliefs and they'll go like, oh, it's not real. Really, I think it should like emotionally connect to people, and we have like a dearth of that, especially in India. Like most of what we see is like Bollywood films, and they're usually about some romance or a wedding, and the wedding's usually wasteful anyway.
Shakespeare had plenty of romances and weddings, I guess, too. So
yeah. But
he
had a theme of nature. All the weddings would happen in a nice forest. He really loved nature.
Yeah. My favorite Shakespeare speech is about the Forest of Arden in As You Like It, when he talks exactly about that and the beauty and the simplicity of living more simply. And he says, is not this life more sweet than that of painted pomp? And again, we can go to that and learn from that and hear that today. We have two questions.
Well, Kokila and Ollie both had their hand up to reply to your question, Johnny.
See, Peter's still a theater director.
Did they? Or
yeah,
do you want to
Ollie and Kokila, you had other thoughts on the role of art and texts and theater in this realm. I'd love to hear.
Absolutely. I was going to say that we as we're moving towards just living our own individual lives, we're actually forgetting. I think it's not so much that we're not aware. I think that it's really easy the way we live our lives right now to forget that this is happening, because like, at least I've said this a lot, just with the kind of lives that we live in urban areas, say in India. I guess I can speak for myself and the people around me. We tend to forget how awful it is just because we live in like our current just very small period of time is so comfortable that it's easy to just, have your air conditioner on all day and to order takeout all day and just create so much waste. And it's so easy to just not remember and think that it's someone else's responsibility and that you don't have to be the one to speak up. And like, at the end of the day, the films we consume, the theater we watch, any of that is just so influential. And having these conversations are things that remind us that, we have a job to do, and we have like things to do so that future generations don't have to face death before they're even born. And I think that art is something that is the best way to reach out to people emotionally, and humans as just intrinsically respond to emotional stimulus more than anything else. And so art, I think, is so important right now when it comes to this conversation.
Art especially can be a way of making the conversation easier to have, in the sense that it's making it beautiful and making it more lighthearted in certain ways, but also like in a situation where you have to take it seriously, because as Kokila was saying, it can become very easy for us to just like retract into our own bubble and really push out the like fear that can really develop when it comes to climate change, because I suffer from really bad climate anxiety, just as Andrea was saying earlier. And so it's really easy to just like pretend it's not happening, or to like go the complete opposite route and like fall into doomerism and just be like, there is no point because we can't fix it, because both are just ways of ignoring the problem, when there are still ways that we can, like, even just like getting our voices heard and like talking about it is a way of like helping the issue,
Well, that's a very good segue into the question we have from the Q&A, which I'd be happy to hear many of your responses on, which is, what inspires you to remain bright and hopeful when facing imposing, daunting issues like climate change?
I wouldn't exactly say hopeful, because sometimes I have thoughts that I'm going to die and then there's not going to be any world left after I'm gone. It's just like kind of awful to think about nothing existing. But I guess the thing that keeps me going is that at least now we have the technology to sort of like deal with it and maybe like at least slow it down a bit. Like we have solar power, we have geothermal energy, and we have we could like use it. But the only thing I'm like angry about right now is the fact that because of capitalism, a lot of good ideas like that won't happen, because mostly companies care about their bottom line and getting the cheapest source of energy. I feel like that has to change before before this situation improves.
And it could be that won't change until you're in charge, Andrea.
Yeah.
Winnie, did I see your hand up? Yeah.
Well, so sometimes I get really upset with any issue, not just climate change, and I'll think there's no way to fix this. It's completely doomed. So like there was a time where it was about social media, there's a time it was about climate change. There's a bunch of different topics. And my mom once told me that that she said that over time humans do like fix things. So they make these huge problems, but they do end up fixing them eventually once they realize that it's wrong. So her example was when she was younger, literally most people she knew smoked every day, all the time, inside, on airplanes, wherever they wanted to, whenever they wanted to. But now it's really gone down. So that was just one example that she told me about, where humans realize that there's a problem, and once they realize that there's a problem, they start to fix it.
Yeah, Kokila.
Actually, to add to that, what makes me hopeful a little bit is that, the area that I live in, I live near a beach called Versova Beach. And it's something I've recently moved here, but I'd heard many years ago that it used to be really, really full of garbage. There was garbage everywhere. And annually, there were sea turtles that used to come and lay their eggs on the beach. And that had stopped happening. And then one year, a group of lovely citizens got together and cleaned up the beach. And there had been a good, maybe 10 years where, I'm not sure of the amount of time, but the sea turtles had stopped coming there. And when they actually cleared it up, they were back and laying eggs there again. And and the beach has remained clean ever since. And now it's been a good 5-6 years since that's happened. And I think that I think we also forget that the human spirit is really even speaking of smokers, I think this was a really inspiring thing to me, where if you look at how a smoker's body and lungs repair themselves as they quit year after year. I think the earth is very similar. If you start treating it better, it finds ways to repair itself. Just like when COVID started 2 weeks in, the world had just become a healthier place because we weren't polluting it as much and we weren't going out and creating as much daily pollution. And so, yeah, I think that I think if we actually act, we will be able to see a difference. And that makes me hopeful.
It's interesting because, this is a question that I think gets asked a lot of activists and of young people. And I am asked this sometimes around very different issues. And I often will say, and I mean it, that the hope and the inspiration that I have these days comes from folks like you. Because I've seen the positive impact. Someone like Ollie and I share a hometown, and I can see firsthand the positive impact that Ollie and their sister and their family have had on my town in their few short years, and have improved the school that I went to. And I can see that it's very tangible. But I'm also reminded of Amilcar Cabral, the revolutionary, the Bisa Guinean revolutionary who partnered with Paulo Freire to change the education system. And he was the one who said, children are the flowers of our revolution. So while you all are inspiring and inspire hope in me, it's not your responsibility, right? That's my feeling more often than not. Yes, we want to be educating, and yes, we want to be providing the resources to the young people to join in the fight to make things better and to improve our world. But we have to do it too, and we have to do it first. We do kind of want to start to wrap up, but I really would love to give you all the last word. If there are closing sentiments or ideas or thoughts that you want me to hear, Peter to hear, folks at home to hear, please unmute yourself and tell us.
Oh, this conference has been I don't know, it just hits you different when you hear people talking about climate change, and then you think about your future. And I don't know, it's just, I don't want to be a doomer, but sometimes you just lose hope a bit. But at the same time, I really am inspired by people like Ollie, because they have obviously done a lot of good for your town. And I am hopeful that in the future that even our government will start to, actually put regulations on things like, fracking and other things that destroy our environment in this country. And I don't know, I'm just hopeful that we'll wake up to the problem and use the resources which are already there, smart enough.
I I also think just keep this conversation going. I think it's so nice because this is just like a thank you to everyone that has organized this, because I'm feeling so inspired to actually go out and do things. And I think the more we do this, the more people are inspired to go out and do things.
And unless okay, go ahead.
I think conversations like this are part of what gives me hope, and just like being able to like talk and like build off people's ideas and like share is just something that's really important, and continue to have conversations like Kokila said. It just is really important.
There is a question in the chat from Christopher. It's an observation too, and I think it's a really good one. And it goes back to what we were talking about before. It's really important to make a space for people who really don't, I agree with you, to find some way to engage with you in a conversation, either in person or on social media too. Christopher aptly points out that the fairy queen is so kind-hearted, and she is so empathetic, talking about the problems of the mortals, and she's explaining this to the fairy king, Oberon, and he just has no interest at all in engaging with her in a conversation. Fine, it's up to you. Just give me that changeling boy. It's your problem. It's not my problem. And we're dealing in this country and in other countries in the world too, with a lot of people, young people, 17-year-old high school students from Sweden talking about this problem and coming up against a wall. Oh, it's a mime wall, a wall of people who just don't want to talk about it. And I wanted to just to say what Johnny has said. It's important for people of my generation, Johnny's generation, to provide the educational opportunities for people. And it's not really to teach, it's also to give them a space where they can encounter each other, engage each other, talk about things that are really important to them, talk about how they feel about the things that are important to them. But I just want to bring it back to the name of our camp, which is Get Thee to the Funnery. We want to keep it fun. We want to have a light heart. We don't call our camp Get Thee to the Bummer of an Experience, studying Shakespeare's text and getting freaked out about the planet. No, we're it's called Get Thee to the Funnery because we want people to have a good time, and then while they're having a good time and get loosened up, then they can find an opportunity, or we can provide the opportunity to talk about stuff like this. It's very important to have a light heart. The man who was the introducer of this conference, Bill McKibben, who you might expect is such a scold that he walks around, carrying the burden of knowing more about climate change and the philosophy and the effects of climate change, that he must feel every single a particle of CO2 that's in the air. He gives his reports wearing really casual clothes, wearing a baseball hat, holding his hands behind his head like that, and showing that you can relax into it. It doesn't have to be heavy, heavy, heavy. The information is heavy, but the feelings that we develop and we won't be able to sustain if we don't have a light heart. I just wanted to give you these words of the famous Black American scholar, philosopher, Cornel West. While I was preparing today, I came upon this. He says, "Subversive joy is the ability to transform tears into laughter, a laughter that allows one to acknowledge just how difficult the journey is, but also to acknowledge one's own sense of humanity and folly and humor in the midst of this very serious struggle. It's a joy that allows one both a space and a distance from the absurd, but also empowers one to engage in the struggle again when the time is necessary." So Get Thee to the Funnery is going to be around physical comedy clubs. Good, funny stuff is around. Keep yourselves light so that you're light enough to sustain the times when you feel really, really heavy. I rest my case.